What's good, Yugioh? It's your boy Squid back in another Squid video. So you're entering a big tournament and you want to do well with a rogue deck. Yeah, you don't want to play the best deck in the format. No Snake Eyes, no Fire King, none of that crap. We want to play a rogue deck and actually do well. Why? Because rogue decks, have inherent advantages against the field if you build them properly and if you play them properly, right? Like, a lot of people are not going to understand what your cards do. You kind of catch them by surprise, and you can play cards to kind of target the specific decks in the metagame that the rest of the field is playing, and then from there just win a lot of games based on that surprise factor and the fact that, people don't really know how to play against you. It's great. There's some definite advantages to doing it, but I wanted to make this video to talk about things that you should be prepared for in order to guarantee that you're actually playing a rogue deck effectively and not losing. Because if you don't do it properly and you bring a rogue deck that's a lot worse than the actual meta decks, then you're probably in for a lot of trouble during that tournament. So without further ado, let's dive into the first point. The first point is if you bring a rogue deck to an actual major event or any big event for that matter, you definitely have to go at least 50-50 with the best deck in testing. What I mean by that is if you're playing against like Snake Eyes Fire King with rogue deck, you definitely want to be able to win as many games as you're losing in testing with decent players or with your friend circle or just online on Dueling Book or whatever. Because if you're not winning at least half your games, then the chances of you going to a tournament and doing well are kind of low, right? Because if you're going to a tournament, the deeper you get, with more wins that you get, you're going to be playing better players who are also winning, right? So if you're not going to be able to go 50% wins in testing with the best decks, then you're probably not going to be able to do very well in an actual tournament, especially when you're playing better players, right? So make sure that you guys are actually tracking your games and that you're actually having a good matchup, a decent matchup against the best deck, because that's really what you want to be focused on playing a rogue deck, is beating what the best decks in the metagame are. And the best decks after Phantom Nightmare are obviously the Sinful Spoils Snake Eye Fire King deck, as well as potentially Sinful Spoils deck. There are also some other rogue-ish decks, like the Voiceless Voice as well, that's floating around. So you definitely have to account for that, Labyrinth as well, but make sure against Snake Eyes you are actually going toe-to-toe with them, because that's the most important part, being able to beat the most popular and the strongest deck in the metagame.
I see you can count. Unfortunately, numbers aren't everything.
Next point is the fact that you guys should be playing cards which are specifically tailored to beat the best deck, aka Snake Eyes Fire King. Anything to stop plays from the graveyard, stop them from summoning a bunch of times, and to stop them from link climbing and pulling off all of their plays, right? So whether that be cards like Necro Ballet, Gravekeeper's Inscription, D-Shifter, D-Fissure, Macrocosmos, Floodgates, like Skill Drain potentially, you will have to play cards like this, unfortunately, in order to stop your opponent from playing, because typically playing a rogue deck when your engine is just worse than theirs on a one-to-one level, you just have to supplement that with non-engine cards that actually account for multiple things that are not one-for-one trades, right? So a better or worse floodgates that prevent your opponent from playing, and then that way they kind of just have to, hope that they draw their outs to your floodgates, and if they don't, you win. It's been like this in Yu-Gi-Oh! Forever. Back in the days, people have sided cards like Mask of Restrict against Monarchs. People have sided cards like Royal Decree against Trap decks. Just cards that account for a lot of cards and make sure your opponent don't play. Unfortunately, this is something that you do have to take advantage of in the card pool in order to beat the best decks in heavy-based pseudo-tier 0 formats like the current format. It's inevitable, but unfortunately, it's something that you have to do. So yeah, definitely supplement your deck with those cards if you want to win. The nice thing about playing a rogue deck is that if you're building your deck to specifically win, you want to build as if you're already in the top cut and you're playing like a 32-man local tournament, because that's what it is at like a YCS, right? It's a top cut to 32, and there are probably going to be a large amount of best decks in that top cut. In a format like this, I would imagine Sinful Spoils to take at least 2/3 of the entire top cut. So if you build your rogue deck to beat that deck specifically and you're able to go toe-to-toe with it, then you maximize your chances of winning, right? Now, the only caveat is you have to kind of turtle up and win the first couple of rounds early on in the tournament, because if you're losing early in the tournament, there's going to be a lot of other rogue decks floating around, right? Because not a lot of rounds have passed, so those decks have not been beaten out by the best decks. So you're going to kind of have to deal with that. As long as you're able to kind of limp through that and beat the other rogue decks that your deck's not really tailored to beat, then you're going to do well, because when you get deeper and deeper in the tournament, the chances of you playing the Fire King deck is going to be more and more. and then that way your deck is just like, you know, fine-tuned to beat that deck, and then you maximize your chances once you're in top cut. My next point is that you have to concede that your deck might be worse against other rogue decks in the format, because the chances of you playing a rogue deck, you're probably going to be main decking a lot of hate for the best deck specifically, right? Like there are players that are playing Kashtira, for example, with D-Shifter main, obviously, and even cards like Necro Valley main or Gravekeeper's Inscription main. They just want to catch the graveyard decks off by surprise. But let's say you pair up against another Kashtira player or like a Floowandereeze player or some random player playing like an anti-meta deck with a bunch of banishing cards, and you're just like, well, crap, my Necro Valley doesn't do anything because they're not using the graveyard. My shifters aren't doing anything. I am at a huge disadvantage. I'm starting my turn with like 3 cards in hand because 2 of these cards don't do anything, right? So make sure that you have to you can't really account for this, right? There's no way to account for the best decks as well as the other decks that are not really affected by the cards that might hit the best decks, right? So unfortunately, that's something you just have to concede against and hope that you don't lose early rounds, so you're paired into like the lower bracket where a lot of these other decks are lying around. So it's just a concession you have to make when you're playing a rogue deck. Unfortunately, you're gonna have a bad matchup against other rogue decks, but that's all right because we are just building our deck to go really deep in the tournament and then specifically beat the Snake Eyes Fire King deck, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. Next point is that people might actually take advantage of the fact that you're playing unfamiliar cards and use that to stall you.
Yeah! Jackpot! Read it and weep!
People are going to be reading your cards against you throughout the tournament. If you're playing a deck like Goatee, everyone's going to be reading your cards. I don't care if this has been on YouTube and people kind of know what the cards do. People will need to know the semantics and the exact fine text in the cards at a tournament. They're going to pick it up and read it multiple times. So this can kind of backfire against you. Obviously, the surprise factor is a big thing against the field, but they can also be like, well, this guy has a lot of unfamiliar cards. I can kind of just pick up his graveyard and keep reading things to stall him out and hopefully win in time, right? So this is honestly something you do have to account for, but at the same time, you can't be too passive about it. If you see people are kind of doing it maliciously and deliberately, you will have to ask them to speed up or potentially call a judge in order to maintain the integrity of the game and make sure that you have your maximum chances of winning with your deck, right? Because it's really unfair that they're kind of using that against you when it's something that shouldn't be possible in the game. It's just like, it's against the game rules, right? So just make sure that you guys account for this. People might try to stall you out. That's unfortunately an inherent disadvantage of playing a roguish deck. And then my last point is people will be salty. Be prepared for the salt, because if someone goes to like a YCS playing Snake Eyes Fire King and they lose against some shifter deck or a Necro Valley deck or some deck playing Infinite Graveyard Hate, they will be salty. Don't expect handshakes from every match, okay? People will be mad. They will be very, very, very pissy. They might leave in a huff after signing the match slip, and they will not be very happy. Now, obviously, if you play at locals and people will probably be cool with it, but if you, every now and then you might piss someone off if you're playing some random deck with a bunch of floodgates. So, unfortunately, this is just something that has been around in Yu-Gi-Oh! For a long time. There will be salt, so just be prepared for it. Make sure you're a good sport about it. You know, you're obviously playing floodgates or cards that are gonna say your opponent cannot play. So try to be a good sport about it. You know, just be gracious about it. Don't really rub it in your opponent's face if you win, but at the same time, be prepared that they will be very, very upset about it. So yeah. Those are all my points about playing a rogue deck if you want to win at a big tournament. What do you guys think? Is there anything we missed? And also, like, what are you guys gonna play for your rogue decks this format? Because I have a lot of ideas, but I'm not really sure. There are bunch of different decks like Kashtira, you know, there's Voiceless Voice, there's Floowandereeze, Labyrinth, there's all these other decks floating around. I'd love to hear what you guys are playing. Let me know in the comments below. Other than that, we'll see you guys next video. Thanks for tuning in.